Have you ever stopped and really thought about this? If almost every country on Earth is in debt, then who exactly are they in debt to? The United States is at its highest level of debt in history, over $38 trillion. The European Union carries around 14 trillion. Japan is close to 9 trillion. Oil-rich nations, export giants, all of them owe massive amounts of money. Welcome to Stories Behind the Money, where power, ambition, and history collide. And every fortune has a hidden cost. So the picture looks like this. Everyone is in debt. But that's where things get strange. Because if everyone owes money, then who is the creditor? This question sounds simple, but it opens the door to one of the deepest truths about the modern world. Because debt is not just an economic concept, it's a system of power, a structure of trust, and possibly the foundation of the entire world we live in. Most people think of debt as a burden, something you want to get rid of, something that weighs you down. But the truth is very different. Debt is the skeleton of the modern world. Everything is built on top of it. Wars, crises, booms and crashes. All of them happen on this invisible network of promises. And when you look closely at that network, you start to realize something uncomfortable. The world is not really in debt to someone else. It is in debt to itself. But that doesn't mean everyone benefits equally. Right now, our planet is drowning in more than $315 trillion of total debt. That's nearly 3 times the size of the entire global economy. So how did we get here? To understand that, we have to go back much further than credit cards, stock markets, or digital money. The idea of national debt wasn't born on Wall Street. It was born in war. In 1694, England was fighting France, and it was running out of gold. The king needed money, but there was none left, so he turned to merchants, and he made them an offer. "Give me money now," he said, "and I will pay you interest forever, and I'll guarantee it with future taxes." For the first time in history, a government sold its future income. To manage this new system, the Bank of England was created, and this changed everything. Because now, the state could spend money it didn't yet have. And what did the lenders get in return? Not land, not gold. They got a promise. But not just any promise. A promise that could be traded, sold, transferred. This was the birth of the government bond. And this single idea became the seed of the modern financial system. France copied it. The Netherlands refined it. And the newly independent United States used it to fund its revolution, and later, its expansion westward. From that point on, debt was no longer a sign of weakness. It became a sign of credibility. If people were willing to lend you money, it meant they trusted you. And if they trusted you, you had power. Empires used to conquer land to extract gold. Now they issue bonds to extract interest. The battlefield moved from maps to balance sheets. Now, fast forward 3 centuries. Today, debt has become the world's most successful export. The United States owes $38 trillion. Japan over $9 trillion. And global borrowing increases by the equivalent of $1 trillion every 100 days. Every country owes. Every bank lends. And every citizen, through taxes, savings, and pensions, is both a debtor and a creditor. But we're still stuck with the same question. Who is the money owed to? Let's start with the United States, because its debt isn't just national, it's global. About half of its total debt is publicly held. That means it's owed to investors, not to other parts of the government. And most of those investors are not foreign countries. They're American banks, pension funds, insurance companies, mutual funds, and even the Federal Reserve itself. So yes, Japan holds around $1 trillion in U.S. debt. China holds about $800 billion. But that's only a small fraction of the total. When people say America is in debt to China, it sounds dramatic, but it's only a tiny piece of the puzzle. Most of America's debt is owed to America. Here's how it works. The U.S. Treasury issues bonds. Banks and funds buy them. The Federal Reserve often buys them back, creating new dollars in the process. Americans pay taxes. Those taxes fund interest payments, and those interest payments flow into American retirement accounts and investment portfolios. It's a closed loop. The debt is real, but the creditor is often just the system looking at itself in the mirror. And this isn't just an American phenomenon. It's global. Japan lends to the U.S. through treasuries. The U.S. lends to Europe through the IMF. Europe lends to developing nations through the World Bank. And developing nations lend back to advanced economies by parking their reserves in Western bonds. Money moves in circles. This is a planetary game of hot potato. Except the potato is made of promises. Everyone holds someone else's IOU. Every promise is backed by another promise. It's like a poker table where every player has borrowed chips from the next. And the only rule keeping the game alive is simple. Nobody stands up. But there's another layer to this story. And it's the most powerful one: the markets. Most people think governments sit at the top of the system. But in the modern world, real power often lives somewhere else. Inside massive funds, financial institutions, and global markets. Behind every government bond, there's an invisible web. Hedge funds, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, central banks managing tens of trillions of dollars. These institutions decide who gets cheap credit and who has to pay a premium just to survive. And when they lose confidence in a country, everything can collapse very fast. Currencies fall. Governments destabilize. Entire economies can be rewritten overnight. Democracy decides who governs. Markets decide who survives. And at the center of all this sits one of the most misunderstood institutions in the world: the central bank. Most people think central banks simply manage money. But what they really do is far more radical. They manufacture debt. When the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank buys government bonds, they don't use existing money. They create new money. Out of nothing. One balance sheet gains a liability. Another gains an asset. This is how modern money is born. That's why every dollar, every euro, every digital currency in your account is linked to a unit of debt somewhere else. There is no such thing as debt-free money. Even the cash in your wallet carries an invisible IOU. And this system has survived for decades on one thing: confidence. As long as investors believe governments will keep paying interest, even if they never pay back the principal, the machine keeps running. But what happens when confidence breaks? We've seen it. In 2010, Greece reached that moment. Its debt became impossible to pay. Bondholders panicked. Interest rates exploded. The European Central Bank and the IMF stepped in. But their rescue came at a price: higher taxes, spending cuts, mass unemployment. For an entire generation, the word bailout became another word for sacrifice. In Argentina, repeated defaults turned debt into a national curse. In Sri Lanka, the government ran out of foreign currency and couldn't even import fuel. The result was political collapse. When systems break, creditors suddenly become visible. the IMF rating agencies, anonymous bondholders. They usually remain in the shadows until everything falls apart. And yet, even after collapse, the logic of the system doesn't change. New loans replace old ones. Debts get restructured. Timelines are extended. Names are changed, but the machine keeps going. Because in the 21st century, debt is not designed to be paid off. It's designed to be rolled over. That may sound shocking, but it's not a conspiracy. It's official policy. When you or I take out a loan, we're expected to pay back the principal. Governments don't work like that. They treat debt like a subscription. Old bonds are paid with new bonds. Economists call this refinancing. And in this system, interest becomes the real product, a kind of rent for stability. The global economy now depends on that rent, like a shark that must keep swimming to breathe. The United States will never fully pay off its $38 trillion debt. Japan has been rolling over its debt for decades, and it now exceeds 250% of its GDP. And yet, its bond yields remain near zero. Why? Because investors aren't waiting to be paid back. They're waiting to renew the deal. Government debt is considered the safest collateral on earth. Pension funds hold it. Banks use it as security. Central banks treat it almost like money. If governments actually paid off their debts, the system would collapse, literally. Imagine if the U.S. suddenly decided to eliminate every last dollar of its debt. Banks and funds around the world would lose their most stable asset overnight. The supply of dollars would shrink. Deflation would hit. Markets would freeze. Paying off the debt would destroy the very thing that keeps the system alive. So governments do the opposite. They issue more, not recklessly, but rhythmically. Debt becomes the heartbeat of capitalism itself. It flows through every pension fund, every mortgage, every market on earth. That's why when politicians talk about balancing the budget or eliminating national debt, they're selling an illusion. The goal is not to remove debt. The goal is to keep it sustainable, serviceable, and desirable enough that people never stop believing in it. Because once belief fades, the numbers stop mattering. Interest rates spike, markets freeze, and an economy built entirely on rolling promises grinds to a halt. That's the real secret of sovereign debt. The plan was never to pay it back. The plan was to keep the world believing it would be. It's a closed loop of trust. And as long as that trust holds, the numbers can stretch almost indefinitely. But trust is not distributed equally. When we say we owe it to ourselves, that's only half true. Interest payments don't move evenly through society. They flow upward, from workers and taxpayers to institutions and investors. In other words, debt is not just a transfer between countries. It's a transfer between classes. That's why global debt and global inequality rise together. The system rewards those who own debt and punishes those who only pay it. If this feels familiar, it's because it's the same story at every scale, from households to nations to the planet. Creditors are not villains. Debtors are not victims. They are two sides of the same engine. The real question is what happens when that engine runs out of fuel, when new borrowing can no longer support the promises made before. That's when the question, who is the creditor, stops being abstract and starts becoming personal. Because at the top of this global pyramid, there is no single face to blame. It's not China. It's not Wall Street. It's not the IMF. It's all of them. And us. The modern financial system has turned debt itself into money. Governments issue it. Banks multiply it. Investors trade it. Citizens depend on it. The line between debtor and creditor has blurred beyond recognition. Debt once meant bondage. Today, it means balance. But if that balance ever breaks, if confidence collapses, then the illusion ends. And we remember what debt really is. A promise that can't be kept forever. If this gave you a new perspective, please subscribe. Because behind every fortune, there's a hidden cost and a story waiting to be told.